Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Spincast. Today, we're going back to the focus of professional Rocket League on the production and design and broadcasting side of things. Joining us is Jason Simpson. He is the RLCSX, that always gets me twisted up, and the RLRS designer, producer, broadcaster. So without further ado, Jason, go ahead, introduce yourself. Tell us where your passions in gaming started, kind of how that led you to become, really interested in the broadcasting side of the industry, and how that took you to where you are now.
Yeah. So just to clarify a little bit, for RLCSX, it's a huge production. So many people involved. That's Psyonix in-house thing. So my work has been involved with the grid, and I've been fortunate enough to do a little bit on both the EU and NA side. Awesome. On EU, working with Top Blokes. They are currently an unsigned roster, which has been a totally different experience than working with XSET on the North American side, where I'm doing more of like a producer role. And that's actually also being produced by Northern Arena. So kind of being subcontracted out a little bit there. But yeah, so my experience there has been just phenomenal. Psyonix still, they know who's been involved since the beginning. They know who has experience with their game specifically. And that's something that has really helped me meet a lot of people in this community, helped me kind of make some connections, and then suddenly get involved on these large scale productions that, when you're first starting, always just felt like a dream.
Yeah, absolutely. These large scale productions, especially every year it scales up, and Rocket League, League of Legends, any of the big games, right?
For
and
sure.
Those get, better. There's more aspects, more little intricacies. That's like, wow, I never thought of that. I never thought I'd wanted to see that. And then it comes to fruition and kind of goes from there. You did say in your bio, you are a designer. So that's kind of my first question, something that I'm interested in as a more creative individual is, what does that design process look like? Like, take me through, like, when you sit down, you're like, okay, what am I going to do today? Like, what does that look like? What does, your end goal kind of look like? And how do you get from, conception to execution?
Yeah. So every single season, every single team, they all have their own specific brand guidelines, but you also want to keep things fresh and new. And so I love having sort of a base to work with, looking at previous seasons of RLCS, or perhaps if there's a new logo, this season of RLCSX, the grid was a whole brand new thing. So for example, when I was working with Top Blokes in EU, I had a really great start with their logo, and I had a really great aesthetic of RLCS and the grid, and that sort of announcement hype graphic that was going there. So I had two source materials that I could try and blend together a little bit, but then a little bit of creative freedom to try and give it its own brand, its own spin on things, because especially with a production like the grid, where every team has their own stream, they have their own individuals involved, you need to find a way to stand out. And so I love motion design, and I love creating accents and work with having a specific style of motion. And I felt that Top Blokes logo, as well as this sort of, future aesthetic of the grid a little bit, both lean into very unique, clean and modern style, but with a little bit of fun, playful animation there. And so basically my process is kind of looking at what exists and trying to respect that in anything that I do, but also trying to always push it a little bit and keep it not necessarily trendy, but with what's up and coming and what's relevant in today's state.
Yeah, exactly. There's always that level of what is the current trend, what's the current look, so to say, right? Everyone, every year or every 6 months, especially in esports, probably even faster, they're always, what's that next kind of like level of graphics, so to say.
Sure.
Especially on the production side, like everyone is trying to like upgrade it and have that eye-catching thing, right? Because I think especially as software continues to upgrade itself and advance, it's like, wow, we can do X now. So now we can do this idea that we couldn't do a year ago or 2 years ago. And then all of a sudden, like, it's just that next level that people look at and are like, wow, that looks really good. I never thought I would ever see something like that. But like, yeah, that's awesome. So that's awesome to hear. Kind of moving to my next question is more on the broadcasting side. Take me through what a broadcasting night in the grid looks like. Who do you interact with? What does that, job really look like? So a lot of high school students, like the stream, they might be some level of content creator, but they don't know what it looks like on the professional side because they don't have that experience, obviously. So take them through, what that looks like, what that process kind of entails.
So we have a call time about an hour and a half before the stream actually starts. And that's when I'm kind of getting comfortable with the casters. So on XSET's side, it's Samael and Vaudable, two people that I've worked with in the scene since I feel like the very beginning, back in 2016. And so I love having that comfort factor there. But at the same time, like I said before, this is being produced by Northern Arena. And so they have a very large budget and a very high standard of quality, which I always love because it inspires all of us to push and do our very best. And so we use vMix, which is a paid broadcasting tool, as opposed to OBS, which allows for a little bit more depth. And since I'm just focusing solely on broadcasting and observing, that allows for a lot of extra times to kind of cut replays during series, to have things that the casters can speak to at the end of a series. And I have to block out quite a bit of my night, but the way the grid works is once your team's eliminated, your production's done. So they let us all go if XSET gets eliminated from the bracket. But at the same time, especially with this time being pushed back, we could be on as late as 1 a.m. if all these series go to the full length.
Max OT.
Yeah, exactly. Max OT. Yeah. So it's, the grid in particular is a very unique production and just always kind of keeping us on our toes. We always have to be very adaptable. And it's a very manual heavy production, which is something that I am not used to. Working with Rival Esports, we have a lot of really talented moderators and developers that have like a back end that can kind of update live with the information. Whereas with something like XSET, they know, okay, here's an experienced individual who understands the run of show and all of the assets on screen and how they evolve. And so that's something that is part of my role there, which keeps me busy on breaks, updating, brackets, where the teams are going. I always have to keep an eye on Battlefy, and I'm constantly communicating with XSET's coach, Trey, and also their manager, Jacob, to make sure that the sponsors are getting the appropriate amount of airtime, that we're showing the videos after each break and everything like that. And so a lot of people involved in getting these productions rolling, and it's a ton of fun. Met a lot of great people through this one, and you can definitely tell Northern Arena is very professional production organization.
Yeah, absolutely. When you have all of those pieces kind of in play, it's very easy, like you just said. It's like, yeah, they know what they're doing. They're definitely on that professional side of these events. And I love to see it when it all comes together, right? Because, I've been involved in that production side, and when I see the professionals do it, it's like, wow. You can tell like where everything's coming from. Like I understand VMix at a very basic level, nowhere near that expert level, but it's like, wow, they're doing all these manual things at once, and it's like coming all together. It's successful and it looks beautiful on stream. Kind of going on to my next question. This is always a very interesting question. I get usually sparks a good conversation, is looking at the relationship between the publisher, developers, and then the production teams, right? Because I think that like the publishers and devs, they control what the tools you get, so to say, right? Of what is possible on that broadcasting side. What camera tools do you have? What observer tools do you have? So it doesn't have to be with Rocket League in particular, but what do you hope to see either change or be improved on, or just kind of stay the same that you really, really love because it's awesome? What do you really like to see in that relationship between the production company and then the publisher and devs to allow you to either do your job a little bit better or be more creative, or just keep happening because you love something, whatever that X thing is, so much?
Yeah, for sure. It's different with every game, which is crazy. Rocket League is first and foremost my passion, but just with who I've met, the orgs I've worked with along the way, I've done things like Battlerite, Valorant, some Battle Royales, and never would have expected that in a million years. But it's really good to just have a voice, that says, hey, we hear your complaints or your recommendations, and we're working to implement them, or, hey, this isn't feasible right now. So any sort of communication between the developer and the publisher is always greatly appreciated, even if it's, not the best news. And that was something that Riot did a very good job with when doing Valorant. We got very quick updates on, hey, if we're doing fly cam, we can't see anyone. We have to be in the perfect position. It's very difficult to control cameras and set up, and quick turnaround, just like Counter-Strike or something, you get that outline of the players in the fly cam, and it becomes a lot easier to kind of spectate and follow there. And I think when Psyonix first released Rocket League, there was a very, very similar approach Spectating it all was uncommon, and it was all manual. And then after the first season of RLCS was announced, there was a lot of focus on these weekly kind of grassroots tournaments and figuring out ways to better improve those. And then with the release of Director Cam, we were like, wow, okay, Psyonix really wants anybody to be able to jump in here, observe and follow the game. And that still exists to this day, constantly being tweaked and perfected. And that's very cool to see. You could definitely tell that they were absolutely willing and listened to the community. And that helped a ton, just producing tournaments. And then that next step, actually working with Rival on tournaments, they're pretty much constantly talking with Psyonix and getting them involved in terms of prizing, in terms of, who's going to be observing, who's going to be casting. And they always have a hand in it, but they're also very trusting of these companies that love the game just as much as the developers do, and let us have our own unique vision and take. And that's why Rival's production might look different than Rocket Baguette's, but at the same time, both are the highest quality caliber Rocket League that you'll get for any region. And that's something that's always been awesome and greatly appreciated, for sure.
Yeah. So I think, those relationships are so important between, like I was saying, the publisher / developers and the production, because those tools work so well, right? Them having the in-game tools, the actual base in the coding, the level design available for the production, and the production be like, hey, if I had this, I could do this super creative thing with it. And as long as those conversations happen, then I feel like it will only ever lead to bigger and better productions. As the industry continues to expand, especially in the LAN side, because there's so many interesting things I think you can do in the LAN side creatively, but obviously LANs don't really exist right now, which really, really stinks. I miss my LAN. And that kind of leads me to my next question is, looking at LANs, I'm not sure how much experience you have with LANs, but more just in a broad kind of overall sense, where do you see kind of LANs kind of heading to in the future from that creative design production side side? I know that's super broad, but whatever pops in your head from that, hey, if this existed in a LAN, this would be super cool, whether it's in the game or lighting or the show or the run of show, anything that pops in your head, wow, this is something I want to create in the future or maybe have done in the past.
Yeah, I think for Rocket League right now, everyone's itching for that international content. So it's kind of a simple, very expensive option, but EU and NA both have very different play styles. Both have evolved so much since the last international LAN, and everybody's really, really itching for some sort of competition between the two regions to see who's made the most of this time to grind against the teams in your current region. And so that international competition and the interaction there between players that often don't get to see each other and also never get to face each other unless there's a large ping disadvantage is something that I'm really looking forward to seeing. I think everyone's looking forward to seeing. And Rocket League was going to be kind of a pre-show to the 2020 Olympics, and then obviously COVID happened. And so everybody was really looking forward to that sort of introduction and getting that sort of world spotlight on the game, and having this time back and building up that hype for the international scene is giving a lot of ways for the community and for the producers to figure out how to kind of harness that and make it the most successful and also kind of widespread, far-reaching event as possible. Because for me, first and foremost, I think of Rocket League like a sport. I always think its audience, whenever you introduce it to someone that may not be familiar with esports, it's very captivating right away. There's a lot of parallels to soccer and other sports out there. And you can see that in some of the production design, trying to mimic football and hockey score bugs or just classic stinger transitions that you might see on ESPN. And so, yeah, I think with LANs, it's going to be a lot of that international hype, and it's going to be trying to reach audiences that may not be accustomed to esports right off the bat. And I think that LAN environment is the best place to do that.
Yeah, I think you just hit that very interesting point that I love to talk to the people that are on the fringe of the community. I always like to say, the ones that have heard of esports, they maybe their son or daughter plays, or they have a friend that plays somewhat competitively, and they're like, yeah, this seems really awesome, but they sit down and watching a game like League of Legends, and they're like, what is this? What is happening right now? Because like,
sure.
you know, a game like League of Legends is so incredibly difficult to follow because there's so many intricacies and all the, like, there's what, 160 some champions now, and, you know, the hundreds of items. And just the quality of the game is very difficult to learn. Like, hey, I sat down 5 minutes ago. What is League of Legends? But Rocket League, on the other hand, is really easy to watch. And, you know, I was really excited to see it as that kind of preface to the Olympics, because I think the world at that average kind of more mainstream viewership can be like, this is easy to follow, right? It's car soccer, right? It's soccer is the biggest sport in the world. And like, it's very easy to like, be like, yeah, now it's just, instead of people, it's cars. And they, you know, have a rocket in the back of their car. So, you know, hence Rocket League. But, you know, I'm really excited to see that international presence, because I think at those international lands is where you get the most hype and the most people like coming into the community from outside of the community. The most people are like, hey, this is awesome. Like, that seems like a lot of fun. Like, everyone involved is super passionate. I'm going to go check it out. I'm going to go watch it, turn on the Twitch stream, or just go buy a ticket if it's local to them. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is what I've been missing out on all these years. Yeah, I'm gonna go to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and so on. But
a lot like me.
Yeah, exactly. I was like just like that. I started, you know, I played games when I was, you know, in middle school, but I never really considered playing competitively, right? I always, you know, play ranked or whatever, but never was like, yeah, esports, that sounds fun, but yeah, I don't know. And then my game was Rainbow Six Siege. Started playing competitive, and it was like clicked, right? And I went from like, yeah, the pros, they're kind of cool, I'll watch like the championship, to like, I'm watching every game now. It's on, at least, you know, it's on another monitor. I might be working or doing something else, but it's on. I keep up to date as much as I can. But I love to see that. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Jason, we've had a fantastic discussion, a number of different points. I think you gave a really good light of, you know, what that production and design and broadcasting kind of looks like at that professional level within Rocket League, especially for what you do. But I will leave you with one last question. This is what I leave everybody with, is looking at the global industry of esports, completely holistic, comprehensively. What is that next step that you think needs to be taken to really springboard esports from where it is now, right? It's growing so fast. It's already so big, but, you know, it hasn't caught on quite as much as like football or soccer, right? Which, like, I'd say like the world's two sports, right? Everyone kind of follows those two in some way or another. But what do you think that next step is to really kind of springboard the industry to being at that level?
I think every game needs to embrace its uniqueness. I'm speaking from the perspective of Rocket League, which to me is just a very unique game. You don't see any direct competitors, and any that try are considered knockoffs. You know, there's no other true car soccer. It's very polished. But you see very similar things in games like Overwatch or Valorant, where there are these unique abilities and unique characters, art style. And I think Overwatch production does a very good job of this. And I think Rocket League is working to try and improve it, where they embrace their game, the aesthetic, the personalities, and they try and push not just kind of a blanket staple esports production, which I think a lot of games do, you know, having a very specific format, having a very specific overlay, almost kind of embracing a sort of gamer aesthetic, you know? And I think if you really want on a global scale for esports to become mainstream and reach this high potential, high level thing, you need to appeal to not just its audience, but also speaking from a designer production standpoint, the uniqueness that each game can bring. And Rocket League being, you know, a sport at its core, just one that you can't physically put in a stadium. You should have a lot of similarities between a sports score bug, the stats that are shown on screen, that dialogue on the commentator desk, and also the format. And, you know, we're seeing a huge experiment in the format with RLCS and there's more Rocket League than ever. And that's helped, you know, me and other community passionate figures be involved. But they also need to find ways to get it in front of the eyes of people that love sports, but don't necessarily realize that this crazy, high action, fast paced sport is out there for them to watch, especially while there's a pandemic going on and you might not be able to find, you know, the latest baseball or basketball game on. But
yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, that's a very interesting point there. It's how long it took like mainstream sports to buy into esports when COVID started, right? It's like you're rerunning games from like 20 years ago every single day, all day. But like esports is still happening, right? It's still a competition, especially like Rocket League, like it's still close. And eventually, ESPN did put the summer series on in May and June. But like that's what, 2-3 months after the pandemic started. Like I would have thought like they would have been like, wow, we need something to get viewership, because I'm sure that like rewatching games from 30 years ago wasn't getting too much viewership. That's something that was happening live, that's new, that's fresh, right?
Definitely.
So totally agree there. Unfortunately, we are out of time though. Great discussion once again. Real quick, if you will, go ahead, plug yourself. Tell us where we can find you on social media, websites, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm Jason Simpson. I go by Simpson, but that's with a J instead of an I. I'm that on every single platform, Twitch, Instagram, etc., except for Twitter. It's Simpson11. So again, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and this is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to come on. I always love having, any perspective I can have. And I always love to focus on the creative side, the production. I think there's so many ways to do that. And I love just to get the feedback that from everyone that comes on the show from that perspective. I think when we all come together, we get a lot of great, beautiful things kind of forming afterwards. So to all our viewers and listeners, thanks for staying the entire time. Stay healthy and stay happy. Obviously, COVID's still going on, so take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and ultimately, stay plugged in.